us to this our revolution, most often than not, people compare us to South Africa, to South Sudan, to other revolutions that have happened around the world, and well, they will advance the point to suit their argument. Now, some people will tell you we can become like South Sudan, and some will tell you we can become like South Africa, and many people do not know that you have in your field of work, you've worked in South Sudan and in countries where separation has been a bone of contention. Now, can you probably tell us what you've done in such countries, and if you look at Ambazonia becoming a South Sudan tomorrow, or probably a South Africa, as people advance their arguments based on which side of the coin they're looking?
Well, I think it is important that we continue to listen to everybody. We listen to the pessimists, just like the optimists, but we stick to reality and be as realistic as possible. Yes, I spent a year, in fact, exactly 13 months in South Sudan with the United Nations, where I did monitoring and evaluation. So I was privileged to spend 1 year in the country where I literally traveled every single state, what they call states, so you call provinces, regions, every single state on a weekly basis to understand the dynamics within South Sudan, be it from a tribal, clan, or just general South Sudanese politic, but also the relationship between South Sudan and Khartoum at the time. It is true also that South Sudan came with its weaknesses and its challenges, but it is important also that even as we strive to prevent the South Sudan scenario, we also acknowledge that we are not entirely in that kind of situation. And I'm going to try and put the two together in a different sense. Some 10, 11, 12 years ago when I was in South Sudan, you had 1 out of every 3 male was a soldier, or at least had some kind of military background or experience, which was natural because there was for decades, centuries, South Sudan was the backyard of Sudan and especially of Egypt and a whole lot of different parts of the world. This is when you talk about the trans-Sahara slavery, a lot of the slaves who were caught and taken across the Sahara came from South Sudan. So there had been always this, South Sudan had been seen as a place where everything was taken, from slaves through to the wealth, to everything. And especially the waters of the Nile, which, as we know through the books of history, feeds the Egyptian civilization up until today. But as a result of that, South Sudan was deprived of everything, and it was systematic. And it is very, very important to note that what is happening to us today is not accidental. Deprivation. We are producing most of the wealth, but we're getting nothing in return. It's all well laid down, calculated. And anybody who has taken the time to understand and study South Sudan and its history over time would understand that the South Sudanese went through the exact same experience. But we need to also draw the distinction and say, and I emphasize on this distinction because about a few months ago, about 6 months ago, when we had gone out on a diplomatic mission and were talking to this gentleman who was widely expected to be the next president of his country, he had made the comparison between us and South Sudan. And the answer I gave him was very simple. In South Sudan, the literacy rate then, as it is now, is extremely low. It's so low. And like I said, 1 out of every 3 male had at least some kind of military experience. 2 out of every 3 male had never been to school. And so for young men and women who were born in conflict, many of them understood that you can only resolve a conflictual situation through violent means. We are not that way. When you look at the literacy rate across Africa, Southern Cameroonians are amongst the highest. I can think of very few countries, Zimbabwe and a couple of others, who may have a higher literacy rate than us. That tells you that the dangers of us falling into a South Sudan scenario as it is today are very slim. We are educated, we are exposed, we've had our people across the diaspora. We have, it's also cultural. We come from a culture where violence is not necessarily where we are coming from. And that is perhaps the reason why for 56 years we have continued to engage a rogue regime that does not understand any other language but violence. That is on the cultural, governance, demographic side of it, and of course education. But when you look at what we are having today as self-defense groups, I think every single Southern Cameroonian acknowledges the importance of self-defense and that we are entitled with. We have the right through international statutes just like any other. We have got the right to self-defense. And we should be able to defend ourselves, defend our women, defend our children. That is something you cannot take away from us. It's enshrined in the constitutions of the world. What, however, we need to be careful about is encouraging splinter groups going out there in the name of self-defense. The danger with that is that while there might be usefulness in diversity, and diversity being that we may have different approaches to different things, the danger with letting groups of young boys and girls, largely boys, but sometimes girls, go out there with weapons, who have not been trained, who have not been schooled in the art of, not just, it's not enough to be able to operate a weapon. There is a whole science behind the operationalization of a weapon, which includes discipline, which includes political education. As it stands, one of the weaknesses, and you had asked the question, what one of the weaknesses, the mistakes we've made, I think one area where we have failed dismally has been the lack of political education for our people. And here I'm not just talking about the young boys and in some cases girls who may have access to one or two weapons here and there, but I'm talking about our people generally. That is one area where I think there needs to be, not even strengthening, we need to start from scratch. We've been brought up in a system where the education made sure that we were not educated politically. As a result, there is such indiscipline in everything we do. You have a lot of people, and that's why somebody can go to bed at night and wake up in the morning and decide to fabricate a story and put it on the social media and expect people to believe it. It's simply because they do not understand the fundamentals of evolution. The danger of having this happen to us and to our people without being able to contain it is that even if we, and as when we become successful eventually, you will have lots of young men and women who have been able to build their own power bases, are able to operate arms of whom you cannot control. The situation in South Sudan was very, very much the same, and that's why I'm trying to draw the distinction where the distinction as well as the convergence, points of convergence between the two, where you had generals in South Sudan. You had certain generals who kept their own military, either because the military, the group of young men and women who followed him happened to be from his tribe or happened to be from his region, then they kept them. And they decided that no, like you hear some of our compatriots begin to say, no, let us do our thing, we'll just collaborate. Now, collaboration means at some point we will disagree, but when you disagree with weapons in your hands, you get to a point where you start to use the weapons against each other. We're already seeing it on social media, how our people are beginning to use very harsh words, very bad words, a whole lot of negativity against each other. When you get to that point when you're carrying a weapon, the tendency is for you to use the weapon. And that is why it is important that at this very early stage, we do not favor any kind of fragmentation of our boys on the field.
Okay, thanks.